Hello and welcome to the Women in Data Science Fireside Chat. My name is Shelley Darnitzer and I am the Director of Strategic Impact and Growth for WIDS. And I'm here today with Jan Sriram, who is a WIDS ambassador who has been assisting me with some of our strategic projects. And we're here today to discuss making moves and finding grooves in data science. Welcome, Jan.
Hi, Shelley. I'm so happy.
Jan has over a decade and a half of wide-ranging data science experience across academia and industry and across big tech companies and startups. And she started her career as an intern at Microsoft Research and most recently held leadership roles at LinkedIn and Bain. And so to kick things off, I'd love to talk to you about how you got started as a software engineer. And when we talked about this earlier, you indicated that you were contemplating staying in academia, but after you held an internship at Microsoft, you decided to work in industry. And so why did you take that path?
Yeah, in grad school, I was working on probabilistic modeling problems, and I was working on machine learning, but on sensor data. And then I was doing my research because I hadn't decided whether I wanted to be in academia or industry. So I joined Microsoft Research. I was still working on probabilistic models, and this time for like indoor location tracking. And I saw when I was in MSR, in Microsoft, so I saw the Windows Phone. I saw, the other devices like Zone, and I thought, oh my God, this is going to change the world. This is amazing. Microsoft is going to come back, and I need to be a part of this. Yeah, I mean, my skills as an Oracle hit and miss, but yeah, I got really excited when I saw the Windows Phone. I just sort of stayed on and decided I want to be a part of it. So yeah, that's how I got started.
You got bit by the bug.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear more about the transition that you made when you went from a software engineer team lead at Groupon to a data scientist at a startup company. And, there are many women who ask us about making a career pivot like that. And so I'm wondering, how did you make that happen?
This was a ways back. So there wasn't like this this mainstream data science function at the time. When I graduated, it was all software engineering. We may have specialized in machine learning, but most of us ended up in software engineering. But after some years, data science roles really took off. And my focus, I think, early on was just I really wanted to be a better coder, better programmer, better engineer, and better team player in engineering teams. So that was my focus, and because of that, I sort of wanted to be like, I enjoyed being in Microsoft, being in MSR, and being in Groupon, and being able to sort of work in programming, but also be part of these large complex code bases where, whenever I had downtime, I could go and, read the code that engineers I really admired wrote, and, follow pull requests, code reviews that they were sending out, stuff like that. So I really enjoyed doing that. And I think I just learned a lot by osmosis, just being there. But I think at some point, working as a generalist, working in production code, I found data science was a more optimal mix for my skills and skills at that point. So, but I do think I value the time I spent being a full stack engineer. That really helped because I was still, even when I made the switch, I was still working on production data. I was working on like a fuzzy matching problem in a distributed system. So it, even though the title had changed, a lot of the job function remained the same for me. And that's, is the sort of the software engineer data science hybrid we had later on. So yeah, that was my switch to data science.
Yeah, and so I'm curious, what challenges did you face when you transitioned from an individual contributor to a leader, to a leadership role?
I think initially usual potholes, and you're like you're sort of shipping things less, getting dopamine from like different from other things. But I think it was not a huge problem for me in startups because I was still writing code. But there was a lot more delegation and enablement. So a little bit of that, letting go needed to happen. But I think I enjoyed developing people, and I enjoyed having that impact through narratives for the larger product, larger company. So I think I settled on it eventually. I think just from my experiences coaching other new folks into leadership, I've seen a couple of themes play out. And one of the thing is evolving self-awareness. It's make or break. Like you need to understand stuff that feels effortless, stuff that feels intentional, and how you sort of manage your energy across them. And I think a big part of that is really internalizing your successes also. It's not just being aware of your weaknesses, but like if you have imposter syndrome, you have to also spend some time internalizing your successes. I think with leadership, there's a lot more ambiguity, a lot more room for like bad decisions, good decisions. Things are not as straightforward, so there will be lots more mistakes, lots more bad calls. I think a lot of folks can stumble upon just ruminating, not really like catastrophizing some of this a bit much. So I had some of that. I've seen some of that. I think it's helpful to know. And another thing that you do that like gets a bad rap, but I think is like force multiplier when you do it well, is perception management. Right? It's important. It reduces noise for the team. It creates visibility for for the folks who are doing really good work. I think it's when done well, I think it's really effective. And I think learning to do these things over a period of time and putting a framework around this, a mental model around it, I think that was like a challenge to opportunity journey.
Yeah, I'm curious about maybe an example of perception management and what you mean by that. So is that like how other leaders or other your boss or others perceive what your team is doing, and making sure that that you're projecting and you're sharing the kinds of information that they want? Do you have a specific example of that?
I think it's helping people grow, right? Like you're sort of in a leadership role. There are folks working on a lot of initiatives, and they may be locked away, really focused on the problems, but it's our job as leaders to make sure that they have a spotlight shined on them. And yeah, that's really what it comes down to for me. Because I tended to be that person who to be away, solving something. So I like, it's you want to speak for folks who are doing really good work and like make a whole noise about this.
Yeah, recognizing their accomplishments and giving them credit too. Yeah. So as leaders, it's easy to put your head down and just focus on getting the work done and what's the next problem to solve, and not celebrating or recognizing. So it's a great thing to be doing as a leader, to recognize their accomplishments.
Yeah, and it's so gratifying to spend your time doing that.
And I imagine that your team members appreciate that and they feel valued, and it's just sort of a virtuous cycle, right? So they want to keep doing more good work. So I'd love to talk a little bit about the different leadership positions that you've held and what you learned from them, like the high points and maybe the low points.
I've held a few leadership roles. So for the most part, I think the theme has been in terms of the kinds of problems, statistical machine learning, text and NLP problems, and ranking and retrieval problems, largely search and recommender systems, except at Bain, where I worked on more a broader, more diverse set of predictive modeling problems, including optimization and forecasting and more numerical problems. And I also, at Bain, I also had this strategic partnership role of building out a center of excellence for data science, managing supply and demand. And so that was a whole new world for me. And at LinkedIn, I was working on improving the relevance of job recommendations. So, still in the ML, large-scale ML side of things. And before that, I was working with a startup on e-commerce product discovery, a couple of startups on e-commerce product discovery. So, different kinds of problems, different contexts. I've learned quite a bit about just one thing is the technical breadth it gives you, right? So working across all these contexts, I've had to sort of think a little bit differently about my technical problem solving. So like, just to give you an example, so in a larger company, you build a flavor of a recommendation system, and you put it out for A/B tests, and the A/B tests sort of tell you whether there's there's change or shift in user behavior. But in a small company, when you're trying to prove value, you have to have a compelling demo. And so a large scale recommender, the cold start problem is not going to work. So we worked on like an online personalization algorithm which reacted a little faster to feedback. Right? Just as a problem setting, it's simple. It's just foundational stats, Bayesian inference, and you just sort of build that in, but it goes a long way. It makes for a compelling demo. And because you have to be able to work on small data, we also worked on like multi-arm bandit tests rather than A/B tests, so they converge faster. So it challenges the way you think about problems. It like brings in sort of that new perspective, working across all these contexts, just technically. And the other thing that was very interesting for me at Bain, for instance, is working in consulting. You're building models in a case context. So when you're doing user behavior modification versus decision making or knowledge transfer, MVPs and POCs for knowledge transfer, like different kinds of hardening needs. So for instance, like at Bain, I cared about data diagnostics, model explanation, interpretable models a lot more, to a much greater degree than I did before. So like working across all these contexts, you'll expand your sort of technical repertoire a lot more. So that's one thing. The other thing also is, I think for if you're seeking breadth, right? So I think it's important to understand that in a startup, you don't have these functional swim lanes, right? You don't have product org to fall back on, or DevOps, SRE to do things, especially in early stage startups. So you're wearing a lot of hats, you're working cross-functionally. And I think that sort of experience is also very valuable. Whereas in a larger company, you can focus in depth about, like your neck of the woods. So slightly different optimization needs. And I think I've learned a lot by just building teams across these different organizational cultures. So I think but there is a common thing that I just sort of, if I had to oversimplify, like good teams across, right? Like I think good teams, they have good juju. Like there's just this overall this trust, and then people are not jockeying and lobbying. There's just this feeling of coming in and collaborating. So it's this inexplicable sort of thing, like trust and safety. The other thing also I think is I think good teams tend to I like to think of this metaphor of bike shedding, right? So for instance, this is actually a term that came up in open source communities. Should you care what the color of the bike shed is if you're building a nuclear reactor? Right? And I think and I think the reason that a lot of discussions go on into this discussion of trivialities is because first, it's easy to have opinions about certain things versus other things, and it's hard to say which ones, reality is not this nuance, right? It's hard to say which one's important, which one's not important. Something is necessary in one context, something is premature optimization in another context. So I think as leaders, I think just paying attention to like anti-patterns like this, especially bike shedding is a big one for me. So if you pay attention and then just smooth things out, I think those things are common across organizations.
Yeah, I mean, you have a lot of breadth because you worked in different industries and different sizes of companies. And it sounds like, because of that experience, that gave you the ability to have the understanding of what the overall goals are, what the pitfalls are, where you need to direct your team if they're going off and bike shedding, maybe solving a problem that isn't that important to solve and they need to be redirected to work on what's most important. So when do you think, or what's your experience around stepping in and when to step in to solve a problem and address an issue as opposed to just letting your team go off and work? Because, when you have a high performing team, you don't want to micromanage and get in there and look at all the details and read everybody's code. You need to give them some space, but at some point you might need to step in. What do you think about that? What's your opinion?
Yeah, for
and
sure.
when to step in? How do you know?
No, for sure. I think it's of course the answer is very contextual, but what I found personally, at least where I find it very useful to have leaders involved and very useful for me to be involved is in leadership roles, you have horizontal context, right? And your team may have this sort of deeper context into what they're doing. So like you said, you don't want to get in the weeds and slow them down there. But I think in the horizontal initiatives, I think there's a lot of value in leaders sort of stepping in, thinking deeply about tooling, about platformization, really, right? I think again here I would sort of use a metaphor because this is like the substrate of the work, right? I don't know if Picasso said this. I've heard it be attributed to Picasso. It is art critics, they get together, they talk about form and meaning, but artists get together, they talk about where do you get cheap turpentine. I think just paying attention to the turpentine, following the noise, and just easing it out. I found, these horizontal initiatives, these tooling initiatives have, they go a long way in making that happen.
Yeah. I'd love to switch gears a little bit and ask you about how you handle assumptions that come up that are made about you because of your gender. I know we talked about this the other day, and we were kind of bonding over that. But sometimes there are certain assumptions that are made about us because we're women. And so I wonder if you'd like to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I think this took some time for me to unpack, but I think it's so one of the things I'll just share from sort of my journey is I did not realize this, but one of the common assumptions that people make is, as women, we're good at interpersonal skills. That this was not, I'm not, I'm not a natural at it at all. So it's a very intentional, it takes a lot of work for me. Like the implicit, non-verbal stuff, it's just, I'm not, it doesn't come naturally to
You're
me
more of an
at all.
engineer, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but even in engineering, people assume that women are good at soft
Right.
skills. I think this assumption really backfires for me. So I found it's good to be explicit. Like for instance, one of my team members and I, we were reviewing something, and he just asked me, I can't I do you love it, hate it, or are you confused? It just occurred to me that it's just this reading and writing nonverbal. I really need to work on it, right? Because I think I've had to learn to be more explicit over time, ask people to be more explicit over time. But I think it's again going back to the self-awareness piece. It's important to know the shadow you cast, right? Like
Mhm.
assumptions are made about everyone, but then there's some things that work in your favor, something that don't. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, being in a leadership position makes you a little bit more exposed. Like your flaws are a little bit more noticeable as opposed to just being an individual person that's working away. Anything, if your communication is off or you've got some bad habits or you're doing something, it's a lot more visible. So that's why that self awareness and also being willing to work on those things is so important if you want to be a better leader, because it's sort of
Yeah.
a process of evolving and getting better.
Yeah, exactly. That's again the good juju, right? Like I mean, you need to have that that trust to actually talk
Yeah.
about this as openly as possible, because that's how you grow.
Yeah, and I think people appreciate that too when when you are more forthcoming about your flaws and what you're working on, and going back to people and saying, I made a mistake. I've had to do that a few times in my career,
Yeah.
going back and saying, oops, but people do appreciate that, your willingness to be more vulnerable and be human. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
people are more willing to them be themselves too.
Yeah, yeah. Like a lot of folks write, read me's like user manuals, manager read me's, they're called. I've done that myself, like just context setting, making sure I convey my communication preferences, my blind spots, in this form so it can reach more people at the same time, or in one-on-ones, right? Like I think your mileage may vary with stuff like this, but I think just knowing that this is something that you have to be explicit about is worth knowing.
So I have another question about kind of a big picture question for you about what would you say is the best career decision that you've made over the years?
So, I think hands down the hardest decision. I think that like for me the best decision is not just a career move. So I was living in the US and I really like my job at Microsoft. And usually like moving back, it's a really involved, really complex decision. I knew I wanted to at some point, but I think the timing of it. I'm really glad I did it at that time. And this was because when I moved from the US to India to take up a role back closer to my family, very soon after that, my mom passed. And so I got to spend that time with her. And I think that was really important to me. And I think that's you like there are impacts, like your career has impacts in your life has impacts in your career. It's just like over time, these are the things that matter, I think.
Yeah. So making that big change and moving back to India and spending time with your family, it sounds like it was enriching on the personal level, a little bit of a risk on the professional level, but you learned quite a bit about that and are grateful that you did that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think I just felt I had to. I couldn't really like. I'm usually quite logical about decisions, and this one was like I even advanced my move by a few months, because I just felt like I had back. I'm glad I did.
Yeah. So, we were talking about, the stress of working in these high demand environments, high risk environments, cutting edge, bleeding edge, sometimes environments that can be really stressful and it can take a toll. And so I'm curious about what you've done to deal with that. What were the lessons that you learned and how did you deal with that yourself?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know that I dealt in any healthy way. So for instance, I was not dealing with losing my mom well at all. And the way that I sort of dealt with that is I just sought new challenges at work. I threw myself into work. I threw myself into hard problems. I resisted boredom, and I made things really unsustainable by just for myself, but by just keeping myself like distracted with hard problems and even changing scenery to get there, right? I think that was what I wanted to do at that point of time, and then over time, so for instance, when pandemic hit, I was having a kid, and then my dad passed, and it just like everything just sort of caught up. I was like having all these positive and these really low changes. So it like eventually, not immediately, but about a year and a half after that, it just caught up to me, and I realized I needed to take a pause, make sense of everything, just uh, deal, right? So, but in my own time, like I think I couldn't have rushed it. I think this is just individual journeys. But like when I was ready, I think I invested in, and I wish I had invested more early on, but I think like that consistent practice, meditative practices, right? Like for me, it's meditation. I got like when I took a break, I got really analytical about my meditation, like what's working, what's not working, like creating a map for myself. And same with workouts, lifting, like I like progressively did lifts and worked with a focus. I don't think you need to take a break to do all this. I think you need to do this while you work. But I think I was just not dealing with losses very well. That I wasn't really investing in all these things. And then eventually, I did.
Yeah, and so I think I can relate to what you're saying when I am under stress, or if I'm grieving or have something going on in my personal life, I tend to focus in work, like work harder because it's comfortable and I can live in my head a little bit instead of in my emotions.
Yeah.
But it can catch up to you. It's caught up to me a couple times. And one of the things we were talking about yesterday was this idea of a quit or grit. Do you quit your job or do you grit and stay there? And so do you have any little pearls of wisdom to share with women who might be experiencing that or thinking about that themselves?
Yeah, yeah. I think again, like it's very contextual, very life situation oriented. I think over time, over the course of a career, you're optimizing for multiple objectives. Right? Like you're optimizing for comp, your growth, meaning, purpose. Like things start getting messy when you start looking at meaning and purpose, and that sort of linear thing doesn't happen. You have to take some risks. But also, I think that this the job hopping as a strategy, as a career progression strategy is suboptimal. And I think it's a short-term game. It doesn't it doesn't pay out very well. It also works very unfavorably. Like I've seen a lot of hiring decisions, screening decisions where it works against the candidate. I think to some extent, you may have to like do the body of work, build build a big network to lean into, to sort of earn the right to take some risks with your career. But I think, just purely as a way to optimize comp or levels, I think it's extremely unfavorable. But I think if it improves your quality of life, like if it value to your to what you're facing in life right now. Like for instance, for me, it really helped having that distraction until I was, ready to deal. That really helped, right? And then life priorities change, they evolve. You just, you try to stay loose and just run with it. Yeah, life happens. So if that is why, I think it makes perfect sense as just to have better quality of life. Other than that, yeah.
That's great advice. I think I've made the mistake personally where I was in an untenable job and I jumped, and I had been at that job a year and a half, and then I jumped to another job, and it was sort of like, a friend was talking to me about this, sort of like ending a bad relationship and getting into another one right away. And I didn't really vet the new company. It was a startup. It was a pretty toxic culture. And it was sort of like a rebound relationship. I had to go through another bad breakup to move on. Yeah. So some of those lessons are tough, but I think that the older I get, the more I realize that you can stay in a position and pull back. And as you said, do some self-care, go back and figure out what nourishes you, spend more time with friends and family, go back to those things that are nourishing your spirit a little bit if you're feeling dispirited. So yeah, I appreciate that, your wisdom around that.
Yeah, I think what people will see, when you stay and you stay through the crests and troughs, I think it's appreciated. I think it's valued. So definitely, in a lot of situations, bug, not a feature. But there's always exceptions. Yeah. And again, like to your point on, what nourishes you, right? You never know how you might feel. Like I did not expect to enjoy time with my kids so much. I always thought, I'll have a kid and then just run back to my comfort zone. So it didn't turn out that way at all. Like I really liked having this time with my kid, and I think when you do stuff that serves you, you just get more resilient with all this.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. So I'd love to hear what you're up to now and what's next for you.
So now I'm working on, I'm still freelancing. I took a break. I, did what I wanted to, learn what I wanted, and invested in things I wanted to invest in, like my fitness and, building up meditation practice. So few of that, but I've also been freelancing. Right now, I'm working on two things that I'm really enjoying. One is with a startup on fintech fraud and risk, doing really cool things with data and lots of opportunity in the market. The other one is I'm working with a school on thinking about how to teach computer science to different ages, and how do you use tech to just streamline this goal. So I'm really excited about both, and it's nice to have the freedom and the privilege, like to to be able to pull back and work on things that interest you. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. I don't know what's next, but it'll definitely be something I get into with intention and like excitement.
Yeah, and most people think that they need to know what's next. And there's a fear around, I don't know what's next, but actually I think by taking some steps and doing things that you enjoy, that helps give more clarity around what is it that I really want to do next. So, and then you also get that inspiration and uplift that can help boost your mood and your, how you feel about the work that you're doing, and can be re-energizing. So that's really exciting.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I think it's also nice to know that, like a lot of people have, or at least appear to have everything figured out, right? Like, but some of us are still, figuring it out, like, winging it. We don't all have things figured out, and that's okay, I think.
Yeah, and our needs change too. I mean, you can go down one path and try some things out and think that's what you wanted, and then realize, oh, maybe that isn't what I want. I really want to pivot. So,
Yeah.
well, Jan, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you for joining us, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.